The Apache arrow missed Ezra Coleman's heart by less than an inch. He pressed his back against the Red Canyon wall, Winchester clutched in trembling hands, listening to the war cries echoing through Devil's Creek. 3 of his survey team lay dead in the sand below, good men reduced to buzzard meat in the space of a heartbeat. The 4th, young Peterson, was screaming somewhere in the rocks. Until he wasn't. Ezra had never killed a man, never even pointed a gun at another human being. His weapons were compasses and transit levels, not Colts and carbines. But the Apache warriors circling below didn't care that he drew maps instead of blood. A shadow moved across the canyon rim above him. Ezra raised his rifle with hands that had never known violence and found himself staring into the darkest eyes he'd ever seen. Not the painted face of a warrior, but a woman, beautiful in a way that stopped his breath, even as death whispered in the desert wind. She could have put an arrow through his skull. Should have, by all the rules of this brutal land. Instead, she spoke a single word in perfect English. Come. What do you do when your enemy offers salvation? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I love hearing from fellow travelers on this journey through the untamed American West. Ezra Coleman had come to Arizona Territory to draw straight lines on government maps. What he found instead was a woman who would redraw every boundary of his soul. Her name was Esperanza Valdez, though the Apache called her Ayana, Eternal Blossom. At 35, she carried herself with the fluid grace of someone equally at home in a Spanish mission or an Apache wickiup, the daughter of a Mexican trader and his Apache wife. She'd learned early that survival meant walking between 2 worlds that wanted nothing more than to destroy each other. She'd been following Ezra's survey party for 2 days, watching through field glasses as they mapped the sacred canyon where her husband's bones lay buried. When Running Bear's war party attacked, she'd seen something that stopped her cold. The white man threw down his rifle rather than shoot back. You are either very brave or very stupid, she said, leading him through a narrow passage that opened into a hidden grotto. Ezra winced as she cut away his blood-soaked shirt, the arrow having carved a groove across his ribs that burned like liquid fire. Probably stupid. Her fingers were gentle, but sure as she cleaned the wound. My husband would have called you coward. Your husband? Iron Wolf, chief of the Chiricahua band. She met his eyes without flinching. He died last spring. Cavalry bullet through the chest. Ezra studied her face, the high cheekbones that spoke of Spanish nobility, the obsidian eyes that held Apache fire. A man could lose himself in features like that, forget his own name and purpose. I'm sorry. Are you? Her voice carried no warmth. Your people celebrate when we die. I'm not a soldier. I'm an engineer. You work for them. I draw maps, nothing more. Esperanza's laugh held no humor. Maps are weapons, senor. They show your armies where to build forts, where to drive us back. She pressed a cloth against his wound, making him hiss. This canyon you were surveying, it is sacred ground, our burial place. The weight of her words hit him like a physical blow. All those neat lines he'd been drawing, all those precise measurements, they weren't just cartography. They were conquest, wrapped in mathematics. I didn't know, he said quietly. Now you do. She began winding strips of cotton around his ribs, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? Outside the grotto, night settled over the desert like a black wool blanket. Esperanza built a small fire that cast dancing shadows on the cave walls, transforming her face into something both beautiful and mysterious. Ezra watched her move around their small sanctuary, noting the way her buckskin dress hugged curves that even Apache modesty couldn't entirely conceal. He'd never been alone with a woman like this. His world had been one of books and instruments, of precise angles and measured distances. Physical desire was something he'd read about in poetry, not something that made his blood sing and his hands shake. "You're staring," Esperanza said, without looking up from the rabbit she was skinning for their supper. "I've never seen anyone move like you do, like you belong to this place." She glanced at him, something shifting in her dark eyes. "I belong nowhere, Ingeniero. Too Mexican for the Apache, too Apache for the Mexicans, too much of both for your people. What about what you want to be?" The question seemed to surprise her. She set down her knife, wiping her hands on a scrap of cloth. "What I want?" She trailed off, then shook her head. "Want is a luxury I cannot afford. Everyone deserves to want something." "And what do you want, Ezra Coleman?" The way she said his name, with that slight Spanish accent curling around the syllables, sent heat spiraling through his chest. "Besides drawing your precious maps?" He could have given her the safe answer: to serve his country, to advance his career, to make his family proud. Instead, he found himself speaking a truth he'd never admitted to himself. "I want to matter, to build something that lasts instead of just measuring what already exists." He met her gaze. "I want to understand what it feels like to be truly alive." Esperanza was quiet for a long moment, her eyes reflecting firelight like polished obsidian. Then she moved closer, close enough that he could smell the sage smoke in her hair and feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "Being alive," she whispered, "means accepting that some things are worth dying for." Her lips were soft when they touched his, tasting of wild honey and promises he didn't have words for. Ezra had never kissed a woman before, never felt the intoxicating rush of soft curves pressed against hard muscle. When Esperanza's tongue traced the seam of his lips, he groaned, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his throat. She pulled back, just far enough to study his face. "How is it possible that a man like you has never been kissed?" "I was waiting." "For what?" "For this. For you." The words tumbled out before he could stop them, raw and honest as an open wound. "I just didn't know it until now." 3 days they sheltered in the grotto, while Running Bear's warriors searched the canyons below. 3 days of shared meals and whispered conversations, of Esperanza teaching Ezra to read the desert's signs, while he showed her how to use his surveying instruments. 3 nights of sleeping on opposite sides of the fire, fighting a desire that grew stronger with each stolen glance. On the 4th morning, Esperanza led him deeper into the sacred canyon, to a place she'd never shown another living soul. The valley opened before them like a secret garden, ringed by red stone walls that rose toward the sky like cathedral spires. Ancient petroglyphs covered the rock faces, spirals and animals and human figures that seemed to dance in the shifting light. But it was the peace of the place that struck Ezra most deeply, a silence so profound it felt like standing in the presence of something holy. "My husband is buried here," Esperanza said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Along with my children." Ezra felt his chest tighten. "Children?" "Twin boys. They lived only 3 days." She knelt beside a small stone cairn, her fingers tracing symbols carved into the rocks. "The fever took them the same week Iron Wolf fell to your cavalry." The grief in her voice was so raw, so immediate, that Ezra found himself kneeling beside her without conscious thought. "Esperanza, do you see now why we fight?" She turned to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. This is not just land to us. It is our souls, our ancestors, our unborn children. When your people build their fort here, they will desecrate everything we hold sacred. Ezra stared at the graves, at the petroglyphs that had witnessed centuries of Apache life and death, at the woman beside him whose pain was so deep it seemed to echo from the canyon walls themselves. In that moment, something shifted inside him, a compass needle finding true north after years of spinning aimlessly. "They won't build here," he said quietly. Esperanza's eyes widened. "You cannot promise that." "I can destroy my surveys. Without accurate maps, they can't choose this location." "Your career means nothing if it's built on the graves of innocents." He reached out, his fingers intertwining with hers. "You asked what I wanted. I want to matter. This matters." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for something she must have found because her expression softened. "You are not what I expected, Ingeniero." "What did you expect?" "Another man who sees only what he can take." She lifted their joined hands, pressing his palm against her cheek. "Instead, I find someone who might understand what it means to give." When she kissed him this time, it was different, deeper, hungrier, touched with a desperation that spoke of time running short and choices that couldn't be unmade. Ezra felt himself drowning in sensation, in the taste of her mouth and the feel of her body pressed against his. "Esperanza," he whispered against her lips. "Si, mi amor?" The endearment, spoken in her native tongue, sent fire racing through his veins. I don't know how to." She silenced him with another kiss, her hands working at the buttons of his shirt. "Then let me teach you." They made love there, among the ancient stones, with the spirits of her ancestors as witnesses, and the desert sky as their cathedral ceiling. Ezra had read about physical passion in books, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of Esperanza's hands on his skin. The way she moved beneath him like water finding its course, the sounds she made when he touched her in ways that made her arch and gasp his name. When it was over, they lay entwined in the shade of a juniper tree, her head pillowed on his chest, while his fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we go back to being who we were before." "I don't think I can do that." Esperanza lifted her head to look at him, her hair falling like a dark curtain around her face. "You have to. Your brother will come looking for you soon, and Running Bear will not give up his hunt." As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed from the canyon mouth. Esperanza was on her feet instantly, reaching for her clothes with the fluid efficiency of someone accustomed to danger. "How many?" Ezra asked, struggling into his shirt. She listened for a moment, her head cocked like a hunting cat. "2 groups. Your people from the east, mine from the west." Her eyes met his. "We are trapped between 2 worlds, mi corazon. Just like always." Captain William Coleman rode into the Sacred Valley with 20 troopers at his back and murder in his eyes. Ezra had seen his older brother angry before, but never like this. Never with the kind of cold fury that made hardened cavalry veterans check their weapons and watch the horizon. "Ezra!" William's voice cracked like a whip across the canyon. "Step away from the squaw, and we'll discuss this like civilized men." Ezra felt Esperanza stiffen beside him, felt the insult land like a physical blow. He moved protectively in front of her, his hand resting on the Colt she'd insisted he carry. "Her name is Esperanza Valdez," he called back, "and she saved my life." "Did she?" William dismounted, his hand never straying far from his sidearm. "Or did she set the trap that killed Peterson and the others? Apache women are known for their persuasive abilities." The accusation hit its mark. Ezra saw doubt flicker in some of the troopers' eyes, saw them shifting position to better cover the canyon exits. These were good men, but they'd been fighting Apache for months. They'd seen too many friends die to trust anything in buckskin. "She had nothing to do with the ambush," Ezra said firmly. "She pulled me out of that canyon after Running Bear's warriors attacked." Running Bear. William spat the name like a curse. Half the Apache in this territory answer to him now. "And you're telling me his woman just happened to find you?" "I am no man's woman," Esperanza said, her voice carrying clearly across the space between them. "I am a widow, trying to protect sacred ground from desecration." William laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sacred ground. That's rich, coming from someone whose husband murdered half my regiment last spring." Iron Wolf defended his people against invasion. Iron Wolf was a murdering savage who got what he deserved. The words hung in the desert air, like a challenge. Ezra felt Esperanza tense beside him, felt the careful balance of the moment teetering on a knife's edge. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and this canyon would run red with blood. "Enough!" Ezra's voice cut through the tension. "Whatever happened between you and Iron Wolf, it doesn't change what's happening here. This valley is a burial ground, William. Their sacred place. We can't build a fort here." "Can't?" William's eyebrows rose. "Boy, you seem to be forgetting who wears the captain's bars in this family. And you seem to be forgetting that I'm a civilian contractor, not one of your soldiers. Right now, you're a man who's been missing for 4 days, with classified survey materials and a known Apache collaborator. That makes you a security risk." The threat was clear. Ezra felt his world narrowing to this moment, this choice between the life he'd always known and something vast and terrifying and absolutely necessary. "Then I guess you'll have to arrest me." He reached into his saddlebags and pulled out his survey notebooks, every measurement and calculation he'd made over the past 2 weeks. Without hesitation, he threw them into the embers of their campfire. The pages caught immediately, curling and blackening as months of work went up in smoke. "Jesus Christ, Ezra. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Something that should have been done a long time ago." William's hand dropped to his gun, but before he could draw, new voices echoed from the canyon walls. Apache voices, shouting war cries that turned Ezra's blood to ice water. Running Bear emerged from the rocks, like an avenging spirit, 24 warriors at his back. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and scarred from countless battles, with eyes that held the kind of hate that could burn cities. "Ayana," he called to Esperanza, his voice carrying the authority of command. "Come away from the white eyes. It is time to finish what Iron Wolf started." Esperanza stepped forward, placing herself between Ezra and the Apache war party. When she spoke, it was in rapid Apache, her voice urgent and pleading. Ezra couldn't understand the words, but he could read the body language. She was trying to broker peace, trying to find middle ground between two forces that had been killing each other for decades. Running Bear listened for a moment, then shook his head violently. His response came in English, meant for everyone to hear. "You would side with the men who killed your husband. Who would build their fort on his grave?" "I would side with stopping a war that will destroy us all," Esperanza replied. "There has been enough death. There will be more death today." Running Bear knocked an arrow, the broadhead gleaming in the afternoon sun, starting with the white eyes, who defile sacred ground with their touch. Time slowed. Ezra saw the arrow coming, saw death flying toward him on hawk feathers and Apache steel. He had perhaps a second to live, a heartbeat to make peace with his choices. Instead, Esperanza stepped in front of him. The arrow took her high in the chest, spinning her around and dropping her into Ezra's arms. Blood bloomed across the buckskin of her dress like a crimson flower, and her eyes, those beautiful dark eyes, looked up at him with a mixture of love and regret. "Mi corazón," she whispered, her voice already growing weak. "The gold, Iron Wolf's cache, in the red rocks where the eagle nests. Trade it for peace." The canyon erupted in gunfire. Cavalry carbines answered Apache war cries, the sound echoing off the stone walls like thunder. But Ezra heard none of it. His world had narrowed to the woman dying in his arms, to the warmth leaving her body and the light fading from her eyes. "Don't you dare," he whispered fiercely, pressing his hands against the wound in her chest. "Don't you dare leave me now." But Esperanza Valdez, who had walked between worlds her entire life, had finally chosen her side. She died as she had lived, protecting the man she loved from a war that had already claimed too much. 6 months later, Ezra Coleman stood on a ridge overlooking the new cavalry outpost at Willow Creek, 15 miles north of the Sacred Canyon. The fort was smaller than originally planned, built with gold that had once belonged to Apache raiders, and funded through negotiations that had cost him his career, his family's respect, and nearly his life. But it was built on empty ground, not sacred bones. Running Bear had died in the gunfight that day, along with half his war party and 3 cavalry troopers. The survivors on both sides had been too exhausted, too bloodied, to continue the killing. In the aftermath, with Esperanza's directions guiding them, they'd found Iron Wolf's hidden cache, enough Spanish gold to build 10 forts. The army had been surprisingly pragmatic about the whole affair. Gold was gold, and dead soldiers were expensive to replace. A fort built on negotiation was cheaper than one built on genocide, even if it wasn't quite as satisfying. Ezra touched the simple wooden cross that marked Esperanza's grave, set on a hill overlooking the valley where they'd first made love. Wildflowers had grown up around it, desert blooms that painted the red earth with splashes of yellow and purple. The Apache considered it a good omen, this garden growing from grief. He visited her here every Sunday, bringing news of the fragile peace that held between the two worlds she'd tried so hard to bridge. Some days he talked to her about the maps he drew now, not for the army, but for the territorial government, charting boundaries that protected sacred sites while opening new lands for settlement. Other days he simply sat in silence, remembering the sound of her laugh and the way she'd tasted like wild honey and redemption. The sun was setting behind the Chiricahua Mountains, painting the sky the color of Apache fire. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, a sound that had once meant danger, but now spoke only of the endless conversation between earth and sky, between what was lost and what might yet be found. Ezra Coleman had come to Arizona Territory to draw straight lines on government maps. What he'd found instead was a love that redrew every boundary of his soul, and a woman who taught him that some things, honor, dignity, the sacred ground where the dead sleep, were worth any sacrifice. The desert wind whispered through the flowers on Esperanza's grave, carrying her name into the gathering darkness. And for just a moment, Ezra could swear he heard her voice on that wind, speaking words she'd once whispered in his ear. Being alive means accepting that some things are worth dying for. If this tale of forbidden love and redemption stirred something in your soul, I'd be honored if you'd share where in the world you're listening from. Like this story if it moved you, and subscribe for more tales from the American frontier, where love and loss dance together under endless western skies, and every sunset promises a new beginning.